After the release of Rockman 3 in Japan, Nintendo launched the next generation of their console hardware, the Super Famicom. The 16-bit console boasted huge upgrades in the visual and audio departments, and with other possibilities with its new controller. Established games and franchises on the previous system saw their own evolution with more advanced hardware, so you'll see massive leaps with new titles. The one interesting call was Capcom's decision to not bring the Blue Bomber over to the new Nintendo console right away. In fact, they chose to stick to the older hardware as it's easier to develop for, since developers can get a lot more out of the aging NES. That's what we're doing today. We'll be taking a look at the last 3 Mega Man titles on NES, Mega Man's 4, 5, and 6, releasing from 1991 to 1993 in Japan and 92 to 94 in the US. It doesn't take a genius to see how this would hinder the sales of a game releasing years after the next generation's launch. Though I think Mega Man 4 could still get a pass due to its release being relatively close to the US launch of the Super Nintendo. Back then, upgrading hardware was still a bit of a foreign concept with the re-emerging video game market.
Does this really have to cost this much? Where should the anger be directed? Not at the parents, but at the manufacturer.
So it has come to this. Therapy sessions for families whom you could call Nintendependent.
First of all, the peer pressure starts. I feel maybe exploited.
So how well have Mega Man's 4, 5, and 6 stood the test of time? Let's find out. But first, here's an ad. If you're looking for a new PC, good news. We've partnered with Apex Gaming PCs to bring you all some pretty sweet systems. Whether you're looking for something modest, wanting to go overkill, or wanting something in between, we've got you covered with 3 pre-built PCs that myself and Apex Gaming PCs have worked on together. You can go with the Chaos PC, Super PC, or the Master PC. And I'll be honest, the names are pretty great. It's almost like they should use these names for some kind of stone or gem or something like that. Anyways, you can use the discount code GottaBeFrank for up to $250 off your purchase. With that said, let's get to the video. Mega Man 4's opening tells us the story of Mega Man's origins. Unlike Mega Man 2, this time it's accurate. After the 3 victories over Dr. Wily, a new foe named Dr. Cossack creates 8 new robots. Rather than sending them to cause chaos around the world, their objective would be to destroy Mega Man. After the 8 robots were put out of commission, the fight was then taken to Dr. Cossack's castle, where it is revealed that he was only attacking Mega Man because Dr. Wily kidnapped his daughter Kalinka. Now he brings the fight to the true villain, and after another final confrontation, the evil doctor escapes from a rotating door. The castle explodes, and Mega Man escapes as well. Rather than doing something like double-crossing Dr. Light in the previous game, this time we have a villain fake-out. Kidnapping another Doctor's family member is pretty extreme, but for the time it worked. Not gonna lie, it'd be kinda cool to see some kind of video adaptation of this plot, because this would make for a hell of a show. Maybe a movie? Visually, this game's another big step up for the franchise. The intro's pretty neat, and there is one little nitpick that I have. Mega Man's stance is a little weird, but it could just be from the perspective he's shown from. Toad Man's stage has a really good rain effect, which I'm positive is only a few frames of animation. In Pharaoh Man's level, I'm not so big on the all-brown stage most times, but this one makes it work. It even includes nice little touches like the text in some of the blocks and the metallic blocks that are scattered throughout the level to let you know, yes, this is a pyramid, but it's a pyramid for a robot. Ringman's stage made me laugh for a bit because it was only when I started writing the script that I noticed that it reskins the same disappearing platform. And this is how much information I take in when I play these games. I know this is kind of treading the same water that so many people have already done, but Capcom once again held a contest where gamers can submit designs for enemies and robot masters. I bring this up because an entire level was scrapped when Capcom was impressed with a fan design that we would come to know as Skullman. I mean, I agree, all of the robot master designs kick ass, but Skullman? That one's my favorite, and his level, also my favorite. I mean, I genuinely love this level. I love the immediate change from daytime to sunset in this one section. I think it comes together and it's fantastic. I love it. Graphics are one thing, but how's the music? Well, it's another solid NES soundtrack. Maybe not as memorable or celebrated as the previous 2 games, but there's some great stuff here. Actually, now that I'm talking about the music, there's something I want to point out. We all know the theme to this game, right? Now, if you grew up with Capcom NES games, you might agree with me on this one, but is there something about that theme that sounds familiar? Maybe it's just me. Anyways, it's probably one of the best title themes for the series, if only it didn't go into the story after a few seconds. It's so good! Why would you cut it off so early? Some other ones that stick out to me would have to be obviously Skullman Stage, Dr. Cossack Stage 1 and 2, Dr. Wily Stage 2, and Drillman Stage. Fun fact, I actually heard Drillman's theme in a Super Mario World hack long before I ever played Mega Man 4. There's another classic theme that's in that ROM hack, but we can revisit that another day. Let's talk about the gameplay. Mega Man 4 is like the others where you go through 8 different levels, mowing over robotic grunts to reach the end and face the Robot Master assigned to said area. From there, players can use the gained weapon from one Robot Master in other stages or against other bosses. All of it leading up to the fight against Dr. Wily. There's a bit between the levels and Dr. Wily, but we can touch on that in a bit. The newest addition to Mega Man's moveset is the Charge Buster. The player can hold the shoot button and charge up a shot to do more damage. The only downside to relying on this has to be hearing the charge sound effect throughout the level, so maybe use the sub-weapon every now and then. Aside from that, it's a welcomed addition. That's something I didn't really touch on with the other games because I mostly used the Mega Buster with the exception of Mega Man 2. But in this game, aside from the overpowered Mega Buster, you actually have a solid selection of sub-weapons. Since all of the bosses are viable, maybe except for Pharaoh Man, it actually makes sense to experiment with the other weapons available. Skullman's ability shields you from getting hit by small enemies. Toadman's weapon showers enemies with pain. There's a lot to work with on the offensive end. As for level design, it's very good. Easily the best in the series at this point, and it's easy to see why. Everything is presented in plain sight, and it's pretty easy to navigate for a more experienced player. Something I was not aware of my first time playing, but Dive Man Stage is like a fun version of Bubble Man Stage from Mega Man 2, since I can utilize the water physics to its fullest extent, rather than feeling cramped with spiked ceilings. It has some spike hazards, but they're used sparingly so it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. The self-building platforms in Junkman Stage do slow down the game a lot, but thankfully the enemy number is limited to 1 or 2 in this area since the slowdown can get a little obnoxious. Even at its worst, it's still in areas I would consider to be somewhat safe. As I mentioned earlier, using Ringman's weapon in the junk area makes it easier to get through, but watch out for the last bit. If I had to point out one blemish, these moving platforms in Brightman Stage are a little odd to predict at first, so you could either figure out how to deal with them or use the rush jet. Though I found out scooting forward a little bit makes a big difference. Throughout the levels you might come across this little guy. This is Eddie, and he takes the place of the random containers from Mega Man 3. The difference is that you aren't committed to whatever item he tosses out. As long as you never collect the item, you can leave the room, come back, and try for another item. My go-to is the E-Tank since they stick with you even with a game over. Though I do understand it can make the game significantly easier, changing it from if you can beat the game to when you beat the game, because every battle can just turn into a war of attrition. Obviously, you would have the advantage. In 1 or 2 stages you can encounter him through the normal path, but for the other ones you'll need the rush abilities to go into alternate routes. Either you can find Eddie, some goodies, or some other abilities like the wire and balloon items. The wire allows you to grapple to unreachable areas, and can serve as a weapon, somehow. The balloon is basically item 1 from Mega Man 2 where it provides the extra platforms. Situational? Yes. But these can come in handy in a tight spot, so you won't have some weird, unusable thing like Mega Man 2's Item 3. Look, I don't hate it, it just didn't really seem that useful to me. I even think the Robot Master encounters are the strongest in the series. Though if you have heard about Mega Man 4, I'm sure you know all about Toadman. He doesn't really do a whole lot if you constantly shoot at him. He does have an attack, but again, if you're constantly shooting at him, you're never going to see it. Aside from that, there's ones like Dive Man who'll give you an interesting challenge. All you have to do is dodge his projectiles and hope that he doesn't charge into you constantly. Ringman's rings are pretty hard to completely dodge, but it can be done. I just don't know how to do it. Pharaoh Man is a pain, so I chose to use his weakness on him. And Dustman has a predictable pattern. So you're going to get a variety of everything, but considering how the player can collect an insane number of E-Tanks like I mentioned before, you'll eventually beat them to get to Dr. Cossack's castle. And if I had to describe these levels, easy. Like, ridiculously easy. The first level has you battling ice physics and the usual enemy shooting out of the pits to knock you down. But aside from that, it's not much of a challenge. The boss, Mothraia, is a pushover, so we can move on. All you gotta do is stay to the left of the screen and just charge your shot. You are not going to take damage. The next level makes heavy use of the rush jet, and there's an E-Tank for you near the end of that level, and it's worth grabbing. The square machine is a cool idea on paper. It moves at different speeds, with the slowest one being the one that makes it vulnerable. And with careful movement, you can get around 2 fully charged shots in, or you can get 1 more if you use its weakness. Not entirely sure about that. It's an easy but fun boss. After that, there's an auto-scroller. Not a lot to say on this. Some basic platforming where the challenge can be easily skipped in some areas with the use of a rush item. The Cockroach Twins is another easy boss, but only because the Charges Hack can make quick work of it. The final Cossack level is pretty cool. It begins with a branching path, which is actually pretty neat. You either go through this part that seems to be pretty easy, or you go through the area with the night sky. Either way, you're gonna have a fun experience. In the fight, Dr. Cossack will try to claw machine you and shoot about 3 projectiles. The slide is extremely useful here, and he goes down to 2 bars of health before the battle is over. This is where Kalinka stops you. And now it's time for the Wily stages. This is where the challenge really begins, and it's pretty interesting with stage 1. It goes from very easy to Bubble Man stage to the disappearing blocks. In my first playthrough of this game, I actually went through the whole thing, but these days I tend to resort to the Rush Jet and Coil abilities. I must have not been interested in trying this more than once. By the way, I'm not making the Bubble Man comparisons because his level is hard or anything, it's just the easiest comparison to make because, I mean, look at it. The boss is the Metal I refuse to say that. Anyways, the one thing I could never figure out is how to properly dodge the big jumps because you're locked in place when it lands and you're still on the ground. Though I will say it's about what I would expect when it comes to difficulty for bosses at this part of the game. The second level isn't really worth bringing up as it's on par with the Cossack levels, it's pretty easy. But the Taiko Trash is actually pretty good. There are these 2 platforms that allow you to get a good shot on them, and all you have to do is dodge the projectiles. You can use the Charge Buster, or you can use the Ring Shot, but honestly I think the Charge Buster is preferred in this because you'll actually have the distance you need. Following this is the Boss Rush. My thoughts have not changed on the Boss Rush since the last video. I don't necessarily enjoy it, and I feel like this game didn't really need it, as it has a very respectable runtime for an NES game. Following that is the Wily Machine, which is unusually easy. Phase 1 will never hit you, and while it's moving upwards, you can get some easy charge attacks on it. Phase 2 changes the movement and the projectile patterns, and is a bit more aggressive. The weak point is a bit out of reach, but can be damaged with a well-placed charge shot. You can also use its weakness to drill bombs, but you need to detonate it close to the weak spot, rather than letting it make contact, which is something the game never really explained. Any other time that you need this to destroy walls, it did it on contact, but when it comes to the Wily Machine, you have to detonate it now, which is something the game never went out of its way to fully explain. Apparently the wire can take out a good chunk of its health, especially when you get it to hit twice, which is something I never thought would happen, but that's pretty cool. After that, we're at the final showdown, and you're going to need the Pharaoh Shot to do damage as the Charge Buster is useless. Again, with no explanation, this would have taken way too long to figure out. What's cool about this attack is the ball that charges above you can actually damage Wily, as well as the shot that you release. So you have multiple chances to do a lot of damage to him. The room is pitch black and your only way of seeing him is when 4 projectiles come together to be shot at you. That's when the game flashes for a moment and you see exactly where he is. After you defeat him, the game comes to an end. Mega Man 4 is an interesting 180 for me, where I felt the previous title was incredibly cheap and made the challenge borderline unfair at times. This game didn't have that. It had legitimate challenge to it, but everything seemed reasonable enough to where beating the game was always within reach for the player. I guess the fact that you can re-roll the items offered by Eddie does make it a little easier, but I'm willing to take that over the capsules from the previous game or having nothing at all. It's a good-looking game with great music and top-notch gameplay. I can't speak on the fake-out villain thing since I wasn't holding a controller or even born when this game released, so I'm gonna leave that one up to you. If you want a good challenge and you want to see the best that the series has to offer, this is a great starting point. Mega Man 5 released at an interesting time as the Super Nintendo was out in all major console markets, so it was interesting to see Capcom continue supporting the NES and Famicom. My guess is that not all consumers have adopted the new-gen console due to the concept of console generations being a foreign concept in some places, United States, so I guess it still makes sense to have an entry on the NES. Aside from that, Capcom continued to hold their contests where designs were accepted like before, so that's an interesting little tidbit. Also the fact that Keiji Inafune believes that this game released as a lower difficulty title, so we're going to be able to see that as we're playing it. Anyways, let's get to the game. There's not a lot of context in-game, but according to the intro, sometime after the previous title, an army of robots was sent to go crazy and destroy the city. The one behind it? Proto Man. He even kidnaps Dr. Light in clear view of Mega Man, though in the Japanese manual there's more brought up. Mega Man asks about the kind of robot that Proto Man is, and he's interrupted by Dr. Cossack to inform him that the robots are attacking the city. As Mega Man returns from speaking from the Doctor, this is where we see in the game that Proto Man is kidnapping Dr. Light. It seems like the English manual carries from here where the Mega Buster is upgraded, which may or may not be intentional, which is something we'll get into later. Anyways, a special project is also mentioned from Dr. Cossack, but isn't ready yet. From here, Mega Man goes to take on the robot army and their leader. After making it to the evil robot's fortress, it is discovered that Proto Man is actually a robot named Dark Man in disguise. After fighting 3 different Darkman forms, he then dons the disguise again and attempts to finish off the Blue Bomber. One of them, I might add, is a rather vile form. Before he falls, a familiar whistle plays. The real Proto Man shows up and reveals Darkman's true form and tosses our hero a capsule to recover. Which is nice and all, I just didn't appreciate taking the L. Once Mega Man disposes of Darkman, Wily appears and yep, he's the big bad of the game. This fake out had to be more obvious considering that the Doctor escaped the final fight of Mega Man 4, rather than having a more subtle escape in Mega Man 3. So it makes sense to figure out that Wily was behind this as well. The Blue Bomber has his final confrontation for the 5th time against the Doctor, and after a brief chase, he frees Dr. Light. The ceiling collapses and we hear a familiar theme as Mega Man and Light are saved. Again, I think the problem is that the previous game took it to such an extreme, so trying to convince players that someone else is after Mega Man is a little more difficult to do. Not only that, but it's probably obvious that Dr. Wily has gone with the copycat route before with the Mega Man clones in the 1st and 3rd games. I'm surprised he hasn't made a Mega Man clone to try to make the general public turn on Dr. Light and Mega Man, but I'm just thinking out loud at this point. It becomes more and more challenging to complement the visuals in the 5th NES title because I sound like a broken record, but let's do it. The opening cutscene looks interesting as it switches from the game's graphics to a close-up of Mega Man, and I think it looks pretty good. Sure, it's tiny, but cutscenes in this console era were a rare sight. I'm going to be honest, I tend to not notice a lot with the art of this game, unless it's incorporated with the level's design. What I mean is that something like the Water Current and Waveman stage, since it takes up nearly half the screen, the part I won't notice would be the buildings that are at the same level as Mega Man because I'm too busy dodging Rider Joes and Irokans. I'm not sure about the 3 different currents. It could be to emphasize distance, but it just looks kind of odd. Hell, I didn't even pick up on the fact that in Stone Man stage you're going closer to the mountains because they become more and more detailed as you get closer to the Robot Master's room. This should have been obvious, but I didn't see the tanks Napalm Man stage. And to hit up the endgame stuff, Proto Man's castle is probably the goofiest concept, but it looks really nice. It does the same thing as Stone Man's level where you get closer to the castle as you progress through the level. Again, a very good looking game for a late NES release. I don't know what music is most recognizable from Mega Man 5 because I don't hear too much about it when Mega Man is in the discussion. The title theme is probably one of my favorites, only to be outdone by the previous games. Waveman, Stone Man, Napalm Man, and Darkman have catchy themes. Dr. Wily's theme has to be one of the best in the series, but it's also bringing up memories of a post review, but let's not dwell on that any longer. Not a lot of absolute bangers, but everything here is still nice. With that out of the way, how does the game play? It's an NES Mega Man game, so you know you're getting more of the same thing. 8 Robot Masters, some Fortress level, and some Castle level where you fight Dr. Wily. There are a few differences that'll change up how players go about taking out enemies and bosses. For starters, the Charge Shot has been given a power and range upgrade. It's a larger shot that deals 3 damage, but it does come with a cost. Taking damage while charging your Charge Shot will disable it. This means damage boosting to get the right shot on a boss is either not as simple or no longer possible. The weapon selection this time around is a bit hit or miss. You have some standouts like the gyro attack, which can be controlled for great effect, making it one of the best weapons in the game. But unfortunately, you also come across some duds, like the Water Wave, which can only be used when Mega Man is on the ground, the Power Stone, which moves outwards and can't be used at close range, which means it can't be used effectively on the Robot Master that it works best against, and finally is the infamous Charge Kick, turning the slide into a weapon that doesn't work too well. It makes you vulnerable to enemy attacks and projectiles, and you aren't able to change direction as you would be able to when you perform a normal slide. It's fairly weak when compared to other weapons, and in my opinion, the Charge Kick should have been a secret upgrade or just turned into one of Mega Man's standard attacks, rather than being a boss weapon. One new addition is the implementation of Beat. This was the invention that Dr. Cossack was working on that wasn't ready yet. In each level, there will be a letter that spells out the game's title. Getting all of these will unlock Beat, who will fly towards the nearest enemy. I found one spot where it really came in handy, but we could talk about that later. When it comes to the game's level design, I'm really mixed. On one hand, there were some cool ideas, such as Waveman's vehicle section. It's an auto-scroller, but halfway you stop for a moment to fight a big enemy. It doesn't really do anything too special, but I did find it to be a lot of fun. It's more of a spectacle than anything else. Gravity Man's level is all about flipping gravity, so you have to consider your movement when you're on the ceiling, which can be a bit disorienting at first. Aside from that, everything else is similar to what we've seen before. Starman isn't waiting in the sky, but his level is a water level without the water. Some higher floatier jumps with the usual spikes in the way. The remaining levels are all by-the-book standard levels that are not any different than the previous game, nor do they have the same challenge. The only exception being Crystal Man's stage, which is pretty lame. If you don't have the Star Crash, you'll be doing a lot of waiting to get through. The Robot Masters, like I said before, are a little more challenging with the knowledge that taking damage will cancel out the Charge Buster. Even so, I found 5 of the 8 robots to be an absolute cakewalk. I didn't want to show this, but here it is. This is the first playthrough of the game that I did. You don't see much footage of this because it was recorded incorrectly. Charge Man, Crystal Man, and Gravity Man were all challenging for me because I wasn't picking up on their pattern. On a second playthrough, Gravity Man still gave me some grief with his gravity gimmick, and Crystal Man has multiple projectiles. Not the easiest thing to get around. Still easy to figure out, but they'll make you work a bit more for a win. It's a bit disappointing that all of the bosses can be pushed around, even with the new drawback of the Charge Buster. But unfortunately, that's just how the game is. Now that the main levels are done, the Darkman levels are next. These are pretty easy, even with user error. The most I can say is that the third level with these blockchain things reminded me of Super Mario World. Aside from that little bit of nostalgia, there's nothing else to write home about. At least the bosses are more difficult than the Robot Masters. They're a bit tough, but they provide a fair challenge, the exception being the third Darkman boss. I made a comment about it earlier, but I think the Vile comparison was a bit more apt. It is the only annoying one because he freezes you in place when the ring projectiles hit you. And at last, the Wily levels are here, and I just can't get into them. There are segments that present a great challenge, don't get me wrong. I think I was just done playing at this point. The game had provided everything it could have and was starting to drag, even before the boss rush. But I will say the bosses are pretty good. The first one has platforms that you need to shoot out so it can launch at you. Using those would put you at a point where you can hit the weak point of the big pets. The circling Q9 flies around you and you need to get on the platforms to hit it when it opens up. Similar idea with different execution and a different strategy. After the boring boss rush, you'll be going up against Dr. Wily Phase 1, which is laughably easy. Same for Phase 2. Phase 3 is annoying because it's similar to the fight in Mega Man 4, except you can see him. So if he's out of reach, then you either have to use the gyro attack or wait. My preferred strategy is to use Beat. Not only does he fly into the Doctor and damage him, but he gives away where Wily will be next, so you can avoid taking damage from him. Tedious, yes, but it's effective. If anything, the entire fight is tedious because it's really easy to avoid the projectiles, so you're just waiting on him to lower down to attack. But after all that, the game is over. Mega Man 5 is alright. I can see where the game shines, but I think there's enough holding it back from choices with level design, weapon effectiveness, and pathetically weak bosses to where I wouldn't consider this one of my favorites. I don't hate it, and if I ever needed to come back to this one, I'm gonna be okay with it. It's one that I can casually pick up and have an okay time with. The story is interesting for NES standards, it sounds great, and it's one of the best looking NES titles, and it's probably one of the easier titles in the series to get into. I will say, it is worth trying out still, so there you go. Now we're at an interesting point of the Mega Man franchise. The sixth entry in the classic series was released in 1993 in Japan and 1994 in the US, also being the final of the NES Mega Man games. Like previous titles, Robot Master designs came from yet another competition held by Capcom, though it was open to fans outside of Japan. Speaking of Capcom, though they did publish the game in Japan, they chose not to do the same in the US, as Nintendo would become the publisher for this one. To get people to buy more copies of this game, they included it with a top-loading revision of the NES. Honestly, a very basic but very good-looking system. It even has a cool dog bone controller. To be fair, Capcom was probably more focused on the Super Nintendo title that would be releasing shortly after this game. Anyways, back to Mega Man 6. After 5 previous titles and all of the challenges that would come with making them fresh enough to warrant follow-ups, how does this hold up? Mega Man 6's story begins with the first annual robot tournament. The idea is to find the strongest robot in the world. The sponsor of the tournament, Mr. X, takes control of the robots for world domination. He claims to have been manipulating Dr. Wily from the very beginning and challenges Mega Man to fight him. Huh, okay, interesting little detail. So Mega Man takes on the World Warriors, the Robot Masters. Wrong game. After that, he goes on to Mr. X's Castle Fortress thing, I don't know what that is. After defeating the robot enthusiast, he's revealed to be Dr. Wily. Yeah, big shocker there. Mega Man is challenged once again by the evil Doctor and storms his castle for the final confrontation. Once he's taken down, Wily is finally arrested and sent to prison. The story is about what you would expect at this point. It's impossible to keep the here's a new villain but it's actually Dr. Wily shtick going on past the third game, but it is what it is. What I like more is the robot tournament. I would love to see this idea revisited, only if they can get the announcer from BattleBots. Hypothetical greatest tournament ever aside, it's a fairly simple story with a predictable twist. Right away we're presented something that is more nostalgic for me than anything else, the Capcom splash screen. The number of times that I've seen and heard this when I boot up something like Street Fighter 2, Aladdin, or Mega Man X3 on Super Nintendo is shocking. Even hearing an 8-bit version of it is still really cool. Anyways, the opening is a bit of a downgrade from the last game, opting for stills of characters fading in with text going around, rather than a mix of close-up shots and sprite animation to tell the story. I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of a shame, but oh well. Aside from that, it's another fantastic looking NES title. seriously, this is getting old at this point. It's just wonderful to look at. There's this great use of color, things just pop out, and honestly, the selection is just fantastic. If anything, Mega Man kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, because when you see all of these new enemy designs with the same blue bomber design kind of plopped in, it's a bit of an eyesore. Yeah, it's a minor nitpick, but it goes to show how the game's art has changed throughout the years. One thing that is definitely worth pointing out is the real-world influence of these stages. Whether it's the United States, Japan, the Middle East, or wherever the hell Centaur Man is from, it's cool to see the developers utilize the influences of the Robot Masters and make some great-looking stages. Also, shoutouts to the designer of Plant Man, basing him off a flower known for smelling of rotten flesh. I think it just fits. One more thing that I think is huge is the animation that plays when you collect a new item, because it finally demonstrates how the item works. Again, with the previous titles, not all of them were obvious. You didn't know if you had to charge it or if you can change direction or what have you. This is huge. I believe Mega Man 6 has a stronger set of level themes than the previous title. Maybe even more than Mega Man 4. Ones like Nightman, Tomahawk Man, and Yamato Man are my favorites, and the other ones aren't too far behind. Something that I picked up on as I was playing the game is that Tomahawk Man is probably the most fitting for its stage. In fact, Tomahawk Man's music fits so well with the level theme of being in a desert in the US. All I can think about are Western films. I mean, there's a robot enemy that's called a Colton named after the weapon manufacturer. And look at the design. The reason I bring this up because I can't get the idea out of my head that the percussion reminds me of a galloping horse. It's just one of those little details that brings it all together for me. I'm sure if I poke and prod a bit more, I could find something else for the rest of the stages. It really opened my eyes, and honestly, the music in this game is fantastic. Give it a listen. The gameplay of Mega Man 6 heavily resembles that of 5. You can jump, shoot, slide, charge an attack, and lose said charge when you take damage. But there is a slight change to it. Rather than it being this gargantuan projectile, it was made a bit longer and a bit more narrow. Rush has been changed entirely. Rather than having your canine companion turn into objects, he fuses with Mega Man to give him the abilities of flight and power. Unlike the previous games, you can use this as many times throughout the level, though they have their limits. Jet Mega Man can allow you to climb up to unreachable platforms, but you'll run out of energy after a few seconds. It's also affected by Mega Man's momentum. If he's falling really fast, then the jet will only slow down his descent. You're not going to be able to shatter levels, but it is a very effective platforming tool. Power Mega Man's power level is pretty big. He can also destroy larger objects and take out enemies that either can't be destroyed or have to be attacked from a specific weak point. These abilities can be used to access alternate routes, which brings me to the level design. And that is incredibly disappointing. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some parts that you would expect out of decent Mega Man levels. My biggest gripe with this game is how often the game goes for an instant kill hazard as an obstacle, mostly spikes. Some levels are more excessive while others hold back a bit when it comes to the layout of spikes. But I think it comes off as really lazy, and it gets worse as the game goes on. But that's in the last bit of the game. It also has moments where you'll be taken on sub-bosses. The series has done this before, but I found these ones to be annoying, especially the Gorilla Tank. You have to push it back while avoiding projectiles, and honestly, I think it takes way too much damage to destroy. They kinda kill the pace of the level, if you ask me. I guess I can talk about the alternate routes. So, the player can go through the beaten path and make it to the Robot Master. When they beat said Robot Master, the icon in the level select will either have a Mega Man icon or a blank space. Those levels represent ones that have alternate exits that can only be accessed through the power of the Jet or Power Mega Man abilities. Beating the level through the alternate exit will not only unlock the Robot Master's weapon, but it will unlock one of 4 letters that spell out Beat, unlocking the character Beat from the previous game. And the ability is the same as before. The weapons are another hit or miss variety. Plant Barrier is a bunch of plants spinning around the player. Flame Blast is a pillar of fire that can stick out sideways when it hits a wall. Silver Tomahawk throws tomahawks upwards. Centaur Flash flashes the screen and isn't very useful in most cases. And now you see what I mean. Yeah, there's a few that are just good weapons to have and have a lot of use, but then there are stinkers like the previous version. This time, I just found myself using the Mega Buster exclusively. I don't even bother with the majority of the Robot Masters, which is worth mentioning. Some of them are just comically easy, while others are going to keep you on your toes. Centaur Man still gives me problems, but I eventually had him figured out. I find the freezing and teleporting to be extremely annoying, but as long as you don't go near the walls, you can take him down. Flame Man's battle can also keep you on your toes, but keeps it pretty fair. You'll have mixed results depending on your skill level, but I think they work fine enough. It's just the others that disappointed me greatly. But once you've finished all of that, it's time for the Mr. X levels. Never have I been more insulted playing a level than I have with these ones. The first three are held together by the spikes that infest the levels that contain them. What the hell happened here? Why do these levels feel like they were just crapped out and extremely unoriginal? Are spikes the only things that exist to increase the difficulty? Anyways, the first boss isn't too bad. The round or two are two identical spike machines on a track that move back and forth. Nothing really to write home about, but they do provide a decent challenge. The power piston is where I question the thought process behind the boss. I'm just gonna say, use the silver tomahawk. This boss is far too unforgiving without it, and you're just wasting time. With projectiles, slowdown, and falling rocks, it's an absolute joke of a battle. I do applaud you if you are able to take it on with the Buster only, but honestly it's not worth the headache that this is gonna give you. I did leave out the final Mr. X level because they finally decided... to go with something else other than spikes for the majority of the level. They do have it in some parts, but it's sparingly used. This time, the instant kill hazard are the pits, but the level's designed in a way where it's actually a fair challenge, so I'm fine with it. There is an opportunity to die, but as long as it's not a low-hanging spike, I think I'm fine with it. The battle with Mr. X is a swinging ball with spikes. Damn it. Anyways, the X-Crusher is pretty easy to fight because there's only one phase, so we can move on. While the first Dr. Wily stages have some spiky floors and stuff, they seem to be on point with the previous Wily Castle levels. They are challenging, but they give you a lot to work with. I think I'm just tired of instant death hazards at this point. I even enjoyed the fight against the Mechasaurus. It's two platforms that raise one at a time where you'll have to hit them in the face while avoiding the fireballs. The Tank CS2 boss is similar to the Gorilla Tank sub-boss, so it is a bit annoying, but the projectiles are easier to avoid, making it a better experience. Following that is the boss Time Waster, and now we're at the... Wow, it doesn't even end with a Dr. Wily encounter? Well, no, it doesn't, because that's reserved for the final level. The first phase is this Crusher, and it's pretty easy to avoid, and the second phase is a rehash of the capsule fight from Mega Man 5? Really, they're doing this again? Sure, why not? Once Wily goes down, he's arrested, and the game ends with a whimper. Sure. Let me be clear about this. I don't hate Mega Man 6. I was just disappointed that the swan song of the NES era was such a letdown when you compare it to 4 and 5. Level design was one of the biggest factors, as that was something I was putting up with throughout the entire game. It came off as monotonous, and by the end of it, I was just tired of playing it. It's not like it's a longer game or anything, it's about the same runtime as the other two. I was just exhausted over seeing level after level littered in instant kill spikes. The bosses provide a decent challenge with some exceptions, but it was just an okay selection overall. The sights and sounds are probably the high points, as well as including the Jet and Power Mega Man forms. Even at its worst, I would still play it over the first and third game. I just won't be quick to boot it up again in the future. And that's Mega Man 6. Out of all the NES entries, it's the Mega Man game of all time, and I know that's going to piss a lot of people off, but that's how I feel. I'm glad the second half of the NES titles were better than the first, even when it drops in quality after the fourth game. They take the Mega Man formula and build on it, and then give us a bit of the same, but not as great. Sorry, Mega Man 6 fans. Even with how harsh I was being on that game, when you compare it with the rest of the NES library, you're still going to have a game that can outdo the majority of those releases. And that's because the rest of them just couldn't do what the Mega Man series did. They were games that felt great to play and have a challenge for all kinds of people. Whether you want something that's relatively difficult or extremely difficult and cheap, there's something there. With that, the NES games are done, and we can move on to a new platform. But not to the 16-bit one yet. We have some other 8-bit titles to look at, so the next time we come back to the classic Mega Man Marathon, we'll be looking at the Game Boy games. But before we do that, we're watching an OVA. Assuming YouTube is okay with that. Hey everyone, thank you for watching today's video. I apologize for taking way too long to return to these. Anyways, if you liked the video, feel free to give the video a thumbs up, and don't forget to sub to the channel if you're new. That notification bell thing also works too, I think, sometimes. I don't know. At this time, I want to thank the supporters of this channel. They are the channel members and patrons who are supporting either at the Super tier or at the Chaos tier. Everyone's name is scrolling on screen, and I want to give a special shout out to Martin YT Plays in the Super tier. If you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive updates and videos, you can use the join button below this video or the link in the description at patreon.com/GottaBeFrank. Lowest tier is $1, and I want to thank everyone who is supporting the channel right now. You can also find my social media links below this video, and with that said, that's going to do it for this video. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Have a wonderful and safe day, and until next time, take care.